Welcome to the Planning Commission meeting for the City of Sonoma for Thursday, July 9th, 2020. And with that, I'll have a call to order. Please, Wendy.
Sure. Commissioner Barbos.
Here.
Commissioner Kelso Barnett.
Here.
Commissioner Larry Barnett.
Here.
Commissioner Bohar.
Here.
Commissioner O'Neill. I didn't hear her, but I see her.
Yeah.
Commissioner Wellington.
Here.
Commissioner McDonald.
Here.
And Chair Felter.
Here. And with that, if you'll put up the flag, we'll do the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
Can you turn the
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. There will be no new items heard by the Planning Commission after 10 o'clock tonight, unless by majority vote we specifically decide to continue reviewing items. If the item is not heard due to the length of the meeting, we will attempt to schedule a special meeting the following week. We have, because this is a Zoom meeting, we have the public is offered the ability to participate by means of Zoom video conferencing. The instructions are given on the website under the agenda for public participation. But to summarize, if a member of the public would like to speak, you click on the raise hand feature in the webinar controls, and the city staff will unmute your microphone and give you the opportunity to speak. A prompt will appear to confirm that you would like to be unmuted. Once you accept it, you have 3 minutes to provide public comment. Once your comment has ended, you will be muted again. You can also join the meeting using a regular phone or a smartphone, or you have the option to submit public comment by email to publiccomment@sonomacity.org. You can submit this comment by email at any time, but if you want it to be read at the meeting, it will have to be submitted anytime after we've started the meeting until that item is closed. If any decision reached by the Planning Commission may be appealed to the City Council. Appeals must be filed with the City Clerk within 15 calendar days following the Planning Commission decision, unless the 15th day falls on a weekend. Appeals must be made in writing and clearly state the reason for the appeal. With that, we are ready to move on to comments from the public for items not appearing on tonight's agenda. Do we have anyone in the queue?
No, Chair Felder, we don't.
And no emails?
No emails either.
All right, we will close the comments from the public. Review and acceptance of the agenda. Have anybody got comments on things that they'd want to change on the agenda? Seeing none, we will move forward with the agenda as is. Late correspondence. Has there been any late correspondence other than what's appeared on the website?
Right. All of the late correspondence was uploaded to the document folder.
Okay. We'll move then on to consent calendar. All items stated on the consent calendar considered to be routine will be acted upon in a single motion. No separate discussion unless the items are pulled by the Planning Commission staff or public for separate action. The only item on the consent calendar is the minutes for the regular meeting of June 11th. Want to pull that item? Seeing none, I'll accept the motion.
Move to approve.
That's Larry, who's the second?
Second.
Second by Steve Barbos. Roll call, please.
Yes, Commissioner Barbos.
Yes.
Commissioner Kelso Barnett.
Aye.
Commissioner Larry Barnett,
Aye.
Commissioner Bohar,
Aye.
Commissioner O'Neill,
Yes.
Commissioner Wellender,
Yes.
Chair Felder.
Yes.
The motion carries unanimously. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We will now move into the public hearing. The first item on the agenda is discussion and possible action to approve a use permit application of Cynthia Owings to allow an exception to the minimum habitable floor area of 150 square feet for an accessory dwelling unit located at 392 Arroyo Way, including action to approve categorical exemption. With that, I will go to a staff report from Wendy Atkins, please.
You're muted, Wendy.
Wendy, you're muted. You're still muted.
Maybe she's lip syncing the speech.
Well, she's explaining to us what's going on, however, she's muted.
Yeah.
I think a finger in the air means 1 minute, please.
Oh,
Finger in the cheek is,
Give her a, I'll call her on her cell phone.
She knows, she knows. She just said she knows.
Can you hear me now?
yes.
Yes.
Oh, talk about the pressure. Oh my gosh. All right. I apologize for that. Let me share my screen now. Talk about technical difficulties. Hopefully we're getting them all out of the way at the beginning of the meeting, so I don't have to worry about this later. Just one moment, everything just fell apart, but it's gonna come back together really quick.
Has there been any word on when we're all going to be able to see each other again? Or,
You mean meet in person?
yeah, I mean, I assume indefinitely on Zoom. Any updates on that?
I hope to be able to do this posthumously.
That can be arranged.
Yeah.
All right, I think I'm ready now.
Okay,
As Chair Felder mentioned, this is a use permit application to allow for an exception to the minimum habitable space of 150 square feet for an accessory dwelling unit. The resulting habitable space would be 108.5 square feet. In 1995, the Planning Commission approved a use permit to allow a second-story garage be constructed on the property. And at the end of last year, the City Council adopted an urgency ordinance related to accessory dwelling units. And discretionary review by the Planning Commission is required because the proposed habitable area is less than 150 square feet. The total area of the accessory dwelling unit is 298 square feet. Here are the elevations of the existing structure. They're just proposing to reconfigure the upper work space to an accessory dwelling unit. And this is the site plan. The proposal is consistent with the general plan, and it's consistent with the development code with the exception that the accessory dwelling unit is less than 150 square feet of habitable area. The proposal is consistent with the coverage, site coverage, floor area ratio, and the existing structure is not located in the rear yard setback, so it doesn't, so it does conform with the rear yard setback coverage. With regard to the urgency ADU ordinance, there's a definition in the development code of an efficiency dwelling unit that requires the unit to contain habitable room of no less than 150 square feet. And because the habitable space of this project is only 108.5 square feet, a use permit is required. And the urgency ordinance allows the Planning Commission to approve a use permit for ADUs that don't conform to the objective standards. The proposal is consistent with the architectural requirements for accessory dwelling units. And given the age of the building, the applicant hired a consultant to prepare a historic resource evaluation to determine if the residence is historically significant. The historic resource evaluation found that the property does not meet the criteria for listing on the California Register of Historic Places and is therefore not a historic resource. So converting the workshop to an accessory dwelling unit would not have a significant impact on the environment, and the project is categorically exempt under the California Environmental Quality Act. Staff did not identify any issues with the project. There are certain findings the commission have to make in order to approve the use permit. And staff recommends the Planning Commission approve a resolution authorizing the use permit, subject to findings and conditions of approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. Any questions of staff?
Yes.
Go ahead, Steve.
Wendy, I'm confused. If I look at the floor plan and dimension plan attached to the packet, I see a kitchen, bathroom, and bedroom with dimensions there, and it looks substantially bigger than 105 square feet. So why are we saying there's only 105 square feet of habitable space?
Yes, the total area of the ADU is 298 square feet, but the habitable area is just the area of the bedroom, and that's around 108 square feet. And so
the kitchen and bathroom don't count as habitable area?
no.
Okay.
Any other questions of staff?
Yeah. Mine is in a similar vein. Chair Felder.
Yes, go ahead, Larry.
I don't recall, where is that definition of habitable space? I don't recall in the discussion of ADUs any discussion where the habitable space was simply defined as a bedroom.
Yes, so that definition is in the development code, and it was not struck out in the urgency ordinance, so it's still valid.
Okay, but from a practical standpoint, is that language that should be updated in the development code?
I believe so.
Okay, added to the list, Bob.
Yeah, we got a list. Any other questions? Seeing none, are we ready to open the public hearing with the applicant?
Sure, and if you're the applicant on the as an attendee, could you please raise your hand? There you go. Let me promote you to a panelist. And now you should be able to speak.
She's muted. Oh, there you go.
Hey, good evening. If you would care to address the commission on your project, we'd like to hear from you.
Yeah, thanks for having us. I'm Ashley Azaki.
And I'm Pascal Azaki.
And we have lived at the property for about 3 years, and we had, due to the shelter in place, we're going to be working remotely for a while, and we just had a son, So we really liked the opportunity to convert the existing storage space into an accessory dwelling unit to give us a little bit more flexibility, both in our current working situation and then when that resolves into an accessory dwelling unit for potential income later on.
Anything else? Are there questions of the applicant? I'm not seeing any. Thank you. Is there anybody else from the public that has chimed in?
I don't see any hands raised, and let me check the written correspondence. No, there is none.
Okay, with that then, we will close the public hearing and bring it back to the commission for discussion and possible action. Anybody like to start? Commissioner Bohar.
I've got the floor plan in front of me. I would be inclined to support this project as it is. I had the same questions that popped up. I think this is a small unit, but I think the judgment on whether it's a small unit or not is really up to the ownership and the tenants that might want to lease the space. I don't see a public issue here really. And just looking at the floor plan, I think that the kitchen area has to be considered habitable or common area. It's right off of the entrance. And it's about the same size as the bedroom. And I think we're just dealing with a definitional issue here. But I would consider that for a small unit like this, the common area is the kitchen. They could have casual dining or chairs for whatever sort of social events. So I'd be inclined, it's going to have a building permit. So all the issues of being in a garage are going to be settled. And all the other physical issues, which I think are the only ones important. Thank you.
Anyone else care to join in? I think this one is pretty straightforward unless I'm reading the commission wrongly. So I would entertain a motion.
I'd like to make a motion that we approve this subject to the conditions of approval and the findings.
Okay, and it has to be a resolution then.
Oh,
Sheila.
okay. Walk me through that, Wendy.
You're moving to approve a resolution, so just color the number of the resolution.
Oh, okay.
Okay, is there a second?
Sure, I'll second it.
And that was who? Larry? Okay. Roll call vote, please.
Thank you, Commissioner Barbos,
Yes.
Commissioner Kelso Barnett,
Aye.
Commissioner Larry Barnett,
Aye.
Commissioner Bohar,
Aye.
Commissioner O'Neill,
Yes.
Commissioner Wellender,
Yes.
and Chair Felder.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion carries unanimously.
Congratulations. You can go ahead with your project. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll then move on to item 8.2, which is the consideration, discussion, possible action to approve a use permit and parking exception application of Michael Ross, who is the architect on the project for the adaptive reuse of the property for a restaurant, brewery, and tasting room located at 32 Patton Street, including action to approve a categorical exemption pursuant to section 15.332 of state CEQA guidelines. And with that, I will ask Christina to give us a staff report.
Thank you. Hope everyone's doing well. All right, so this project was before the Planning Commission for a study session I feel like it was almost a year ago at this point. And talk about the old fire station at 32 Patton Street, which has been the Three Badge Beverage Company headquarters since about 2014. It's located just south of the plaza. I'm sorry, I'm not used to doing the presentation this way. Just south of the Sonoma Plaza, the site's approximately 18,000 square feet. It's developed with the existing building, which would not be changed through the proposed project. Surrounding land uses include some single-family residence and commercial structures to the north, service station and offices to the south, additional offices to the east, and to the west is Pete's Coffee, Williamson, and the post office. The project is located in the downtown district planning area and has a zoning of mixed use. It is within the historic overlay district, and the setbacks don't really apply as they're in new construction. As we discussed previously, it was the former fire station until 2006 and was purchased by the Sonoma County Community Development Agency at that time and was used for various governmental uses from 2006 until 2014, at which point the property was sold with the dissolution of the redevelopment agencies and was purchased by the applicant in 2014. The original application materials indicate that the intent was a phased approach, and so the current application is a continuation of the larger vision for this property. The current proposal before the Planning Commission tonight is for the interior renovation of the portion of the existing structure to support a new 90-seat restaurant, a 10-seat tasting room, as well as the commercial kitchen and bar to support those uses. Exterior renovations would include landscaping and other alterations to support 24 outdoor seats. And also there would be modifications to Patton Street in order to convert the existing apparatus space into areas where patrons could eat outside. And as part of those improvements, there would be 4 additional on-street parking spaces created along Patton. The second story of the building would be continued to be used for the 3 badge offices, and the existing parking lot would continue to support 13 on-site spaces. The proposed operating characteristics are that the restaurant and tasting room would operate Monday through Friday from 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. and 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. Saturdays and Sundays. This is strategic to work with the 3 badge offices and their operating characteristics as well. Again, as I mentioned, the existing 13 on-site parking spaces would remain, and then there would be the 4 new spaces that would be created by the repaving along Patton Street and the curb improvements. Here is an overview of the site plan. And the elevations, and there are no exterior modifications proposed at this time, just the use permit before the Planning Commission. Here from the south. So as mentioned already several times, there will be 13 on-site spaces. The office requires 1 parking space for 300 square feet of floor area. So the office use would require approximately 9 of those 13. For the restaurant and tasting room, it's the same requirement. It's 1 parking space for 4 seats. 25 parking spaces total would be required for the restaurant and tasting room. The outdoor parking spaces, there's no additional parking required for up to 25% of the approved indoor seats. The applicant is proposing to use the existing 13 on-site seats and is requesting a parking exception for the remainder. And part of that consideration would be the additional parking spaces that are going to be created as a result of the Patton improvements. So the intention of the exceptions are to allow for limited adjustments to the physical and quantified development standards of the code in response to environmental features and site constraints, historical development patterns in the property or neighborhood, and in the interest of promoting creativity and personal expression in site planning. So the number and dimension of parking spaces is one of the valid exception requirements. Here are the use permit findings of approval, as well as the exception findings of approval. And as discussed in the staff report, the staff recommendation is to approve the use permit and parking exception, subject to findings and conditions of approval. Are there any questions?
Questions of staff?
Yes.
Go ahead, Larry.
I'm recalling some additional parking spaces on the north side of the building with a egress on First Street East, which I believe in previous discussions were going to be utilized as employee parking. Are those part of the part of the proposal?
I'll let the applicant comment on that, but my understanding is that's part of the 13, but there are no conditions or anything restricting those for specific uses.
And how many spaces are actually in the existing parking lot now? I thought that was 13.
I can look at, I think Michael Ross is on. He can comment on the specifics. I would have to look at the site plan to confirm.
Okay.
The proposed plan has 10.
And then there's 3 in the back, 1, 2, 3.
Yep.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions of staff?
I have a question.
Yes.
So the tandem parking that's in the back, the 3, that's considered, we expect that's going to be for employees. Is there any way to put a little regulation around that so that it's clarified, like who's parking there? Because it's obviously not restaurant guests if it's 3 cars in a row, right?
Of approval that they be used by staff or be used first by staff, something like that.
Yeah, I don't know how you've handled that in the past, but I just want to recognize that those 3 parking spaces are not what would be typical for a restaurant guest to be able to use, because you're going to get stuck. So as we're looking at the number of parking spaces, I just think that we need to address the fact that those 3 are unique.
Other questions?
One more.
Yep.
And maybe the applicant can answer this. How many employees are anticipated to be needed for this restaurant operation? And typically, is there any provision made in parking plans for employee parking?
So our parking standards don't differentiate between employees or patrons. The narrative does contain, I believe, an estimate of employees, but my understanding, I can let the applicant speak to this, is that they're not intending to open the restaurant themselves. They'll be going out for for potential vendors for the restaurant. But our standards do not differentiate between employees versus patrons.
Okay, but in the parking calculations that have been developed, was there any, I don't recall seeing an employee line item in there for the parking calculation.
Yeah, our code doesn't look at that as a separate line item. It's based on the number of tables.
So maybe I'm just confused. So are you telling me that the parking requirement is based on the seating capacity and does not take into consideration the actual physical bodies that are in the facility as a total? There's no provision for employee parking?
Correct. Our code does not, or what our code does is for different uses, it has a different metric that it applies. So for the office space, it's 1 space per 300 square feet. It
Right.
doesn't have anything to do with the number of employees. And for the restaurants and other uses, it's based on the number of tables.
Wow, I guess somewhere along the line I've missed that, but it seems to me it's a fairly critical consideration. Thank you.
The only land use in our code that specifically connects parking to employees, I believe, is hotels, right, Christina? which we saw in our next agenda item tonight.
Yeah, for hotels, it looks at what the peak shift would be, but
Right, which is employees.
not a hotel.
Right.
Yeah.
But we don't look at, but no other land use does that currently.
Yeah, I'd have to pull up the code and double check, but for a restaurant and office and commercial,
I believe that's correct, Kelso.
Right, it is, yeah.
Well, of course I know, but I had to say,
Okay, all right. I might knew it was right, but yes, thank you.
other questions of staff?
Chair Felder?
I had a question. Oh, you go, Joe.
Go ahead.
Who's going?
This is Commissioner McDonald.
Okay. I just had a question. Maybe this is something that the applicant has already talked to staff about, but I just wanted the commission to think about if we're looking at a use permit, the potential or possibility of valet parking and what that would entail. And if this becomes a popular venue, a special events venue, that's something that the use permit may want to consider, or something that may have to be considered down the road.
Christina?
I think that's a great comment. At this point, I think the issue before the Planning Commission is the parking exception. The applicant does not propose a program.
There is no provision right now in the use permit for special events, is there?
No, there's not.
Okay.
Christina, I have another question. For the restaurants on the plaza that get a special grant of parking spaces, how far does that extend? Like where does that stop? Does it stop right on the corner of Napa Street and Broadway, or does it extend a little bit down Broadway?
My understanding, it's just the businesses that face the plaza that don't have the parking.
So it's only businesses that directly face the plaza?
I believe so. I'd have to.
It's just the ones that face the plaza.
Yes.
That is the answer, yeah.
Other questions?
Chair Felder?
Yes.
My turn?
Mr. Bohar?
Yes. My recollection from the study session was that the area where those staff parking spaces are was the loading area. And at the end of that was something akin to a loading dock where the Cisco trucks and various vendors, liquor, wine would unload. Is that, Christina, do you know if that is the case?
Trying to zoom in.
You're a little garbled, by the way, on your mic, at least as far as I'm concerned.
Sorry.
I believe
It says receiving on the site plan, but I let Michael Ross and August speak to that.
the item that's up on the screen now talks about early morning delivery in the middle of that parking lot coming off of Broadway. So there would be deliveries in that parking lot, is the way I interpret it.
Oh.
I think that's a great question for the
There
applicant.
said something about parking on the perimeter line.
In the center
In
of
the
the
middle of
parking lot.
the parking lot.
I can't read it. Well, maybe I can read it on the,
There's early morning
Parking lot.
delivery space.
okay. I have another question, Christina. The 4 spaces on the street, do I understand that they are requested to be striped as compact? And is that true?
My memory is that there were just a couple of them that are, so it looks like 2 of them are standard and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 would be compact.
Yep.
So my question is this, that's on public property. Has the Public Works Department, I think they're the ones to approve that. Have they reviewed that?
Yes, the Public Works has reviewed and approved the proposed
Okay.
modifications to patent.
Okay, thank you.
A question.
Yep.
I have actually a couple, but first, back on the parking issue for a second. I'm thinking of Belly Deli, which is, halfway up between this site and the plaza, but faces Broadway. Do they have parking? Or are they getting to use the plaza as like the restaurants facing the plaza?
I think they have parking in the parking lot behind that's accessible from First Street.
Oh, for that whole complex?
for that whole complex.
Sonoma Court Shops.
Okay. And my other question is, are there any other 90-seat restaurants in and around the downtown area of Sonoma?
So Hot Monk is well above that.
If you
believe
just count
Arthur-
indoor, I'm sorry, if you just count indoor spaces.
Yeah, my memory is that Layla's approximately that large. We have a lot of restaurants that are approximately that large.
Mary's,
What about Red Grape?
the Swiss.
I'd have to pull the use permits to double check, but based on my experience, there's numerous that are that size.
BDK.
Thanks.
Any other questions? I'm not seeing any, so with that, I think we will open it up to public hearing and let the applicant speak to this. Are you there, Wendy? There you are.
Yes, so I've promoted August Sebastiani and the folks from Ross Julius Kusenberry. If there's any other applicants that need to be promoted from the attendees, could you please raise your hand?
You may need to unmute them.
I'm working on it.
Can I briefly follow up on the deli belly question that Commissioner Barbros mentioned?
Okay.
And I believe Commissioner Barnett also. I was under the understanding that parking lot on First Street East is all reserved. Have you ever had that experience? Like, I've tried to park there before, but every single space is either assigned to an office in the court shops or a VRBO in the court shops or an apartment in the court shops. I was under the impression those parking lots were not open.
You may be right.
Okay.
I would agree with that. That's I've parked in there,
Also,
but
that they're reserved for tenants,
yes.
not for public parking.
So, because I don't think Deli Belly has parking. I mean, maybe there was grandfathered in at some point, but I don't think they do.
With that, we'll open the public hearing and hear from the applicant.
Am I on? Good evening, commissioners. August Sebastiani here. Wish we could have everyone in the council chambers and be face to face, but understanding the nature of where we are, found it only fitting that I'd be presenting to you here from the firehouse itself. Proudly and excited to reach this very important phase in our project. As you know, we purchased the building in 2014 with the very specific intention of growing the use. And so we moved in our office space around that time. We have done our best to not just pretty up the neighborhood and improve the facade, not just with a paint job and not just with some landscape work, but also internally. We've done quite a bit of work in here, and we're very proud to show it off at every opportunity. Proud to help improve the scenic drive up to the plaza as visitors and community members approach the plaza. And as part of our intentions on delaying the next phase of this project, our intention was to just get established, get to know the neighborhood. Obviously, we know it well. I live just a few blocks away, but to get to know more intimately those properties adjacent, those properties within an earshot that live nearby, and prove to them with our actions, not with our words, that we are responsible neighbors, that we are considerate neighbors. I feel like we've done a good job of that. And now it turns to phase 2 into this restaurant proposal. Now, many of you are well familiar with this conversation as As Ms. Tierney mentioned, we were before you about a year ago with the study session, but this actually is our fourth formal meeting with city staff and yourself combined. So we have been very deliberate in putting a plan together that not just, obviously makes us proud, but makes the community proud, makes the city proud. So here we are, ready to go with the final request, hoping and looking forward to hearing any of your comments. You'll see we've made some tweaks along the way, and I don't want to get too far ahead of myself as we put together a presentation that Michael Ross, I think, if I may turn it over to Michael, will walk you through.
Hello, can you hear me? I'd like to share my screen.
Go ahead, Michael.
Can I share my screen? Can you see a slide?
We see a Ross Drulis Cusenberry cubic Bauhaus derived building.
Okay, so
Michael, you might need to
share
start the video.
screen, and there we go here.
There you go.
Now?
Yep.
Perfect.
Excellent. Well, hi, everybody. Thank you for making this Zoom meeting possible. 32 Patton Street is an excellent example of adaptive reuse. I really admire the durability and flexibility of this building. As Christina previously mentioned, that I believe it started out as an auto repair or a gas station, and then it became a small firehouse, and then a larger firehouse, and then a temporary city hall, and a temporary police station, and now three beverage corporations world headquarters. And as part of that evolution and change, we feel like this is the natural next progression. And it's with the dissolution of the redevelopment agencies, a lot of redevelopment has fallen on the private and nonprofit sectors. And this is an excellent example of one. It's also a stated priority. The adaptive reuse of this old fire stations is a stated priority of the development code, and we are consistent with that. And what's been happening over the years is August and his family have been making a long-term investment in the infrastructure of this building, placing fire sprinklers in it, bringing it up to code, ADA compliance, and things like that. And that first initial investment, phase one conversion period into his offices is complete. It's successful. And now phase two, the 90-seat restaurant and 10-seat tasting room and parking is what we're discussing tonight. And I was following your discussion with interest, because really it's about how does this proposed restaurant fit into the overall context of our town. And the development code really is about fit, even though it's very prescriptive at times and things like that. It's about how do we make a project a good fit in the neighborhood, in the community that we love. And if you take a look at the next few slides, you'll understand how this project is really integral to the plaza area itself, because the plaza area really is becoming more and more a pedestrian realm. And the spokes of the pedestrian interest goes off in the east, the west, and the south, as well as the north, obviously, to the playing fields and things like that. And we believe that this building and this site is one of the true gateway buildings just before you encounter the plaza. And it's part of the ensemble of businesses and locations on this block of Broadway that is becoming increasingly more pedestrian oriented. As Christina said, there's Pete's Coffee, the post office, the museum, various shops, and we think that this would be an ideal and compatible use for this part of town. Also, we're aware that it's a neighbor to Sunshine School, and that the tasting room is in the approximate standoff distance as the other tasting room in the area, and that we haven't had any exceptions from Sunshine School about that. So we think that this is a good location for a tasting room relative to the fact that the headquarter offices of Three Badge is right there in the very same building. Well, this is a view of the building as a temporary police station. When we were constructing the new council chambers and police station, the police occupied this building. This is, maybe circa 2008 or so. And this is what it's like today. What this indicates to me is really August's commitment to the quality of development that you see here. Really long-term durable materials, thoughtful treatment of landscaping, the new maples and boxes that are looking great along the street, the vegetables growing in the corner in stone landscape basins. This is the type of care that we will be bringing forward to the restaurant project. And the inside, similar transformations. This is the old lobby of the fire station. This is Three Badge now. What we're proposing is approximately a 5,000 square foot tenant improvement. Virtually all of the changes to this property for the restaurant are happening within the existing walls. There will be no additions. There'll be no cutting of windows, no imposition of light, air, shade, or shadow on the neighboring property to the north. Basically, the existing shell and core will remain unchanged. Most of the development will be interiors. And we will be back, or whoever the restaurant operator is, will be back through design review when the final floor plans are developed. And what we're showing you today is basically a conceptual floor plan, but importantly, it indicates 90 seats for the restaurant and 10 seats for the tasting room. The parking count actually is 21 spaces that we're asking you to count. The 13 spaces that are on the site right now, the 10 that are facing Broadway, the 3 tandem spaces that are on First Street, and yes, those spaces will be assigned to staff, either Three Badge staff or restaurant staff. And then we're creating 4 new spaces along Patton Street that never existed before. And by closing off the old apparatus bay aprons, and we're asking you to count the 4 existing parallel spaces that are on Patton Street now. And at the study session, you asked us to see if there was any opportunities for overflow in the neighborhood. And I did that during the month of February, prior to shelter in place, actually before we even anticipated anything as odd and impactful as that. And granted, even though it was the slow period of the season, I visited the site approximately 15 times, and during that month, there was always around 15 empty spaces at 6 p.m. at night within a 1-block radius. And so we felt comfortable that should there be a need for 3 or 4 additional spaces, that it would be readily available on street. Now, what we're asking you to do is to allow us to use the Urban Land Institute shared parking approach, which basically allows when one use's peak demand is offset from the other use's peak demand. So The peak demand for the office space would be during the day, office hours up to 8 o'clock, from 8 a.m. in the morning to 5 p.m. at night. And then after that, the parking lot would be used by the restaurant, and therefore all 21 spaces that we're asking you to count would be assigned to the restaurant use. In that scenario, we would only be short around 4 spaces based on the count that if you just took 1 space for every 4 seats in the restaurant. And the Urban Land Institute shared parking approach is very astute, and it encourages pedestrian circulation. It allows one parking lot to do double duty. It consumes less land, minimizes the creation of additional impervious paving, and I think it's a great shared space concept for this project. And this is the analysis that we did. After 5 p.m. on weekdays and on all weekend days, there would be 21 spaces available, which was plus or minus approximately 4 spaces short from the 25 necessary for the restaurant. We did meet with the city engineer. We're very appreciative of Fergie's input. We coordinated the civil engineer's street parking analysis with Public Works, and that's what you're viewing today. Here's some renderings of what it might look like from Patton Street, from Broadway, largely. A view of the outdoor dining area from Broadway. A view of the indoor dining area. What we're proposing to do is bring the indoors and outdoors in and sort of interlace the experience of the outdoor experience with the indoor experience, and use these large glassy panels that would open up and sort of be visors and openings to this beautiful new space. So that is, in summary, our presentation, and both Og and I are available to respond to questions, and thank you very much for this opportunity to make this presentation.
Thank you, Michael. Questions of the applicant? I don't know if I'm seeing hands, so we might have to unshare the screen, Michael.
Okay.
Everybody.
So here it comes.
Great, thank you.
You bet.
Questions of staff, or of the applicant, sorry. I've got one to start with. First of all, I certainly love this concept. It's a great project, and I have absolutely no problems with shared parking. The only thing that I am concerned with is that intensity of use for the property. It seems like it's a bit much. We're talking about 90 inside seats plus 24 outside seats for really a total of 114 diners, which is a lot of people. And I realize that the 24 outside don't have to count in the parking totals, but that does add to the parking in fact. And I wonder if you would consider backing off the inside seating just a little bit by reducing it from 90 to 78. That means 3 tables disappear, and that would reduce the outside by 2. So you would still have 100 diners that would be available to use your restaurant in combined indoor and outdoor space. And to me, that would get down to probably a parking exception of 1 spot, which is a lot more tenable to approve than to ask for the whole thing. So I'm just throwing it out to you. Would you consider reducing the seating by a little bit?
Well, thank you. We're open to consider anything. Obviously, we're looking to maximize the use to make it as efficient as we can to obviously give whoever ends up occupying the space every opportunity to succeed. I know that obviously the restaurant business, even in the best of times, can be a tough one. So we find it important to be able to offer that opportunity to through the RFP that we would put together for a potential operator. Another important point that, again, I'm not a restaurateur, but spent a lot of time speaking with our local restaurateurs and learned quite a bit about the allure of the blank canvas that is this space, and the fact that it's a big rectangle makes it fairly easy to manage from a staffing standpoint. If you've got a place, I don't want to throw anyone under the bus in town, but some of the restaurants have some cozy nooks and maybe a dining room, a private dining room that is maybe difficult to service and difficult to keep an eye on. So you have to hire an individual to specifically keep an eye on that space. And while we want to hire as many individuals as we can and provide as many jobs as we can, the fact that we have an opportunity to create a dining room where you can see a number of diners from really, anywhere you stand, because there's the elbow room to look around and see. So in terms of the efficiency of staffing, we think that the impact, and I know that you had some questions about staff parking earlier, we think that this can be a very efficient space from a staffing standpoint.
If possible, Chair Felder,
Oh,
if possible, I'd like to add a few comments to your suggestion. I believe that this restaurant would be more familiar with restaurants around the plaza than with any other restaurant in town. And all of the restaurants around the plaza basically have zero parking. People park and walk to them. And if you were to do a seat count of some of the larger restaurants like El Dorado Kitchen, or for even Girl and the Fig or Mary's Pizza and things like that, they have large seating capacity and zero parking. And where in this case, we're actually providing a fair amount of parking, which is much different than the other ones nearby. And the cost of adapting this building, putting in grease traps and all the things that are going to go along with it, is going to be a challenge to a restaurant operator. And I would like to advocate for 90 seats and allow the parking exception to handle the very, very modest parking shortfall.
I could chime in too. I would, given that this is a new use in the location and some of the existing characteristics of the restaurants nearby, I would recommend potentially considering a condition of approval that after the restaurant's been operating for a year, that the Planning Commission could revisit the issue. And if the parking is something that needs to be revisited, that could be addressed at that time. Perhaps the valet program that Commissioner McDonald mentioned would be a good option, or perhaps reducing the seating would be a good option. The hard thing right now is we don't really know what the operating characteristics are. So just something to consider for the commission.
And if I may chime in one more point, as we talked about this, thank you, Christina, I appreciate that. But one consideration is with this urban land use planning, the Urban Institute planning scheme, is that it allows for not just staggered use with our office space, but staggered use with the neighbors who are also occupying the street parking nearby, meaning the post office ain't open after 5 p.m. and Pete's Coffee, I don't know what their hours are, but they're after 5 or 6 p.m. They're not very busy as well, and same can be said for a number of the operators in the neighborhood. In that maybe on the weekends there might be some overlap there, but certainly during the week and in the evening hours there is not such a potential for conflict.
Are there any other questions of the applicant? I don't see anybody raising their hands, so I think what we'll do is then we'll open it up to the public for comment. Do we have anybody in the queue?
I don't see anyone raising their hand as an attendee, and let me check and see if we have any written correspondence. No, Chair Felder, no public comment.
Okay. With that, then I'm going to close the public hearing and bring it back to the commission for discussion and possible action. And I would ask to keep Og and Michael in as participants in case we have more questions of them. Go ahead, Kelsel.
I just want to piggyback off the fact that we just opened public comment and there was none. And generally, when it comes down to parking, typically the people that get most interested in a potential parking issue or a requested parking exception are the neighbors. And we haven't heard from any. I worked on an early iteration of this project almost 10 years ago that was proposed on this exact site. And the neighborhood was very actively organized to oppose anything that the developer proposed here. And one of the leaders of that opposition almost 10 years ago, we received an email from her today lauding the project and basically having no issue with it and not even addressing the parking issue. And so since we were just talking about parking, and generally the neighbors have the most impact is on the neighbors, and not only have they not turned out currently, but they're sending letters of support, I think we should probably consider that as well.
Thank you, Council. Anyone else? Larry?
Well, speaking of the neighborhood, the properties on First Street East are, I'm not even familiar if there's any residential uses on First Street East practically at all anymore. I mean, if there are, it's a small handful. And so my own experience in walking the neighborhood is that that after hours, basically it turns into kind of an empty bowling alley in that particular area. And even on Patton Street, the only real neighbor portion of Patton Street doesn't happen till you almost approach Austin Street. I mean, there's not much there. There's the church and there's the dental building across the street and the gas station. I mean, it's just not really, to my way of thinking, a residential neighborhood. It may have been at some point in the past, but it's certainly not predominantly a residential neighborhood now. I don't have any problem with the project as it's proposed. I think, you know, it'll be a great addition to the street. And it'll be a great addition to downtown. And, you know, for years, even when I was on the city council so long ago, the question of how we get people to walk down Broadway and not just consider the walkable area to be the plaza itself and the surrounding streets, but to actually walk down Broadway was a constant discussion. It was one of the reasons, Michael, you'll remember this, one of the reasons that the tree planting project got off the ground, and Robert Barron's was part of that back then. And
Absolutely.
And it was the discussion of, you know, creating a more shaded atmosphere so that we could expand the commercial uses successfully, because there was a lot of turnover and empty spaces on that street for a long time, and it was pretty bleak. So I think this will be a draw and increase that pedestrian use. And Broadway in general, in the time I've lived here over the 30 years, has become more and more commercial as you go down Broadway. There used to be actually people living on Broadway, and there's not that much of that anymore either. So I think this is a natural evolution, and it's a beautiful building, and so I think it's a great use, and I'm supportive of it.
Go ahead, Ron.
I would like to just go back and visit the comment that Chair Felder made about the intensity of use. And I also do support this project, and I think it'll be a real plus but the concept of intensity, I think also is a fair subject to at least throw back out on the table. I am not a restaurateur. I have restaurants a lot, but I don't know where the break-even points are. And I do also recognize that restaurants are a tough business to keep going healthy year after year after year. But I would also like to just kind of comment from the applicant's earlier statements about keeping the 90. With this floor plan being open like that, that in and of itself should be a draw to a potential vendor. Just the fact that it is what they said it was in terms of open and very efficient and so on. Then you add the fact of its location, fact relative to the plaza, and the fact that it's in Sonoma. I'd like to think that when they send out that RFP, that there's going to be quite a few responses. So I do think that it does warrant, again, at least some discussion amongst us about the intensity of use and whether or not going 90 to 85 or 90 to whatever. I think it's worthy to think a little bit more about it. So those are my early comments.
Go ahead.
Before we started this meeting, I was also thinking about the intensity of use and the idea of trying to shrink the size of the restaurant down a bit. And then the more I got to thinking about it and listening to the comments about the walkability of the town and thinking of all the plaza restaurants with virtually no parking that are filled with customers, and how our town seems to absorb those people, whether they're on the plaza or some side street. And I live up Patton Street myself, and I just don't think it would be a problem in terms of, we haven't even talked about Broadway. I mean, when I've gone to Belly Deli for dinner, I've parked on Broadway and down in front of the cleaners. And so I think that the people will find a place. And First Street East is, as Larry mentioned, essentially dark at night, and there should be space there as well. So I too will be supporting this project and as proposed, and look forward to seeing something that looks like what we saw on those slides.
Next, anyone? You back?
Yeah, I just had another just real quick comment. My comment regarding intensity is not related to parking. I feel very comfortable about the opportunity for both on-site, the new on-street parking, as well as the overall context of what's offered in the neighborhood. I guess my comment about intensity relates a little bit more to the character of Sonoma and the fact that we are still a relatively small community. And I'm just thinking, when I think of the word intensity, I'm just thinking of the people that could congregate and gather, et cetera. I certainly like vibrancy. I certainly like what's the term? An engaged environment as far as with people and laughter and so on. But again, I just am throwing out the topic, again, not with a parking concern, but just the intensity of use.
Chair Felder, I have a comment.
Go ahead, Sheila.
Thanks. I did raise my hand the electronic way, but nobody seems to see.
I hid that screen because nobody was using it.
Oh, okay. All right, well, I'm going to echo the comments of my fellow commissioners. I think the project I'm very, very favorable of this project for a couple of reasons. August, I think that you did a very smart thing by doing this in stages and beginning by taking a look at getting your business established there, and then having a chance to have an opportunity for the neighbors to get to know you and to get part of the rhythm of the neighborhood, and to make a property that is so much more aesthetically pleasing that it enhances the approach to Sonoma. So you've done a great job on that already.
Thank you.
And I do think that I'm surprised I didn't run into Michael Ross down there, because I went down there several times also looking at the parking situation as I was walking my dog in the evening. And that area is pretty much a ghost town at night. And I think that in reference to Commissioner Wellander's comments, it's lacking that vibrancy that I think that we could so benefit from. And as we extend down that Broadway corridor, it also is easier walking for people that are staying at the hotels, like the hotel that is further down Broadway. I'm forgetting the name of it now. And of course, further down is the Lodge. And then we have the property over on 2nd Street. So there's quite a few visitors to Sonoma that will be able to walk there from their lodging. And I think that's a very important factor. I also think that as we go forward in this new environment that we're in, I too was concerned about the 90 seats and the 10 and then the 24 outside. But I actually think that this is a maximum cap, and that what we're going to see over the next several years is that restaurateurs are going to have to adjust with not having the ability to work at full capacity, that they're going to have social distancing, the outdoors, having the environment where there's a lot of ventilation and a lot of airflow. I think they're going to have the ability to make the decision whether 90 works or if they have to do 50 or what they have to do in the foreseeable future, and then scale that over time as we start dealing with post-pandemic society. So overall, I just think that this project is amazing. I love it. I love the design. I can't wait to go there myself. And I'm definitely looking for holes in it so that I can show you I studied the material and I can't find them.
No problem.
Thank you.
Commissioner Bohar.
I also like this project a great deal. I think it's a terrific location for it. And as Commissioner Barnett pointed out, it's going to draw people down Broadway, which has been it's going to help those other businesses on the way, I think, to get more exposure. I also think that the applicant has got a history of supporting this town, and we have very high expectations that this is going to be executed in a way that it's going to be a real asset to our downtown community. So I feel very positive about it. The other side of it is that we're granting a couple of what I consider to be significant benefits in the parking area. And I like Christina's observation about having a 1-year review of the parking. I'm not so much in favor of a valet option, but I do think a 1-year review by the commission would be a fair and appropriate thing, given the fact that we don't really know how this is going to shake out with the parking. We'll know, I hope, a lot more in a year. So I would suggest that we consider that. Thank you.
See any other hands? Go ahead, Kelso.
Yeah, I also think this is a great project. I think even though this isn't on the plaza in terms of parking, it sort of functions like it's on the plaza. We, about 1.5 years ago, approved the restaurant that recently opened at Taub, on the corner of First Street West and Napa Street there. They have 64 seats, no parking. So, an additional 35 basically seats, or 26 seats if you're just looking at the restaurant, with parking provided. I think, especially in an area of town where there's really no one there at night, as other commissioners have said, I think is appropriate. And more to the point, is exactly what the city wanted for this site. I read back in 2019, September, the study session for this project, the RFP that the city put out when they were looking for buyers for the firehouse, and they literally wanted an adaptive reuse project that enlivened Broadway, brought people down Broadway, hopefully had a restaurant, and this is literally what the developer is delivering. And so when you add in my earlier point, the neighborhood seems supportive of it. I think it's a win-win for the community, and I'm happy to support it.
I should chime back in, and even though I brought up the question of intensity, I don't want that to diminish this project. This is such a wonderful project that if you feel that it's necessary to provide 90 seats to give your restaurateur a chance to operate however he sees fit, I would be supportive of the project in that fashion. I just felt obliged to at least query you to see what give and take you might have. But if you're convinced you have to live with that, for all the reasons that I've heard from the rest of the commission, I agree. It might be well for us at some point to come back and look at parking if it becomes an issue. But in today's world, in the near term, I don't think we're going to see that because we won't be at capacity for a long time. So I don't even know if it's worth making a condition to the project at this point. So I think I've heard a very strong consensus for this project, and I would love to hear a motion to go ahead.
Quick comment, please.
Commissioner McDonald has had his hand up a couple of times. You should probably raise it a little higher.
He's technically not allowed to vote on this, so because we have a full commission, so he has to
comment.
Yeah.
Question.
Go ahead, Ron.
I was just curious on that parking consideration for that 1-year review. I would like to know if we indeed supported that, what would that mean? If it meant that parking was an issue, does that mean we'd have the ability to cut back on the tables? Or before I can feel one way or the other, I'd like to know what that would give us in terms of flexibility from such a review.
Anybody want to take that on? Christina, do you want to try to address that?
Do we have the latitude to go back and say, I'm sorry, the parking's not working, we will need you to crop back to 75 seats? Or
I think that's a discussion for the commission as to whether they feel that that's required or not. We can craft a condition however is needed. It sounded like I'm not sure what the consensus is on the commission.
Chair Felder, can I make a point?
Yeah.
I understand the ambition behind it, but I don't think we would ever get an accurate assessment of parking impact in this year.
No. Well, it would have to be conditioned on after it opens, and maybe it won't open in the next year, but the times are so uncertain now that I'm leery to put any kind of condition to come back and look at parking.
I tend to agree.
Right.
Go ahead, Kelsey.
And just to follow up on that, a use permit's valid for a year, and then you can extend it up to 2 years. So we're sort of looking at a 3-year period, and experts say that the world might not get back to normal in 3 years. And so when it gets to parking and everything, I don't know if we'll be able to even properly evaluate that. And so that's why we support that. But
it just creates confusion on the issue, I think.
Steve?
Steve?
I would agree with that. And I think that in terms of trying to find a operator or a lessee for this restaurant, they need to know what they're going to be getting, and there can't be any uncertainty about that. So I just think we're not going to know with the pandemic for so long, and it's just not a feasible way to approach this project. So I am not in favor of any second look at the parking. If this gets approved, that's what gets approved.
Can I make a motion?
Yes.
I'd like to make a motion that we approve this item on the agenda for the adaptive reuse of the property for a restaurant, brewery, and tasting room located at 32 Patton Street, including action to approve a categorical exemption pursuant to section 15332 of the state secret guidelines.
I'll second that.
Okay, roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Barbos,
Yes.
Commissioner Kelso Barnett,
Aye.
Commissioner Larry Barnett,
Aye.
Commissioner Bohar,
Aye.
Commissioner O'Neill,
Yes.
Commissioner Wellender,
With enthusiasm.
and Chair Felder.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion passes unanimously.
Good
Thank you
job.
very much, Commission. Much
Thank you
appreciated.
very much.
It's a great project, and we're looking forward to see it develop.
You and us both.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
item 8.3 then, which is the consideration, discussion, possible action to approve a use permit amendment and a design review application by Michael Ross to remodel and expand the existing spa and fitness center building and replace the current swimming pool, landscape, and deck areas with a new pool and outdoor deck at MacArthur Place Hotel and Spa at 29 East MacArthur Street. An initial study and mitigated negative declaration have been prepared in accordance with the requirements of the CEQA. And so with that, I will go to Christina for a project staff report.
Well, improvements at this project site have been before the commission several times. Currently, what is under consideration is a use permit amendment to expand and improve the existing spa. The programmatic improvements were approved in 2018, and what's before the commission now is approximately 4,000 square feet over what was approved in 2018. The number of treatment rooms would be the same. This existing project went before the Design Review and Historic Preservation Commission in May 2020, and they recommended that the Planning Commission approve the project. The project includes the remodel and expansion of the existing spa and fitness center building, removal and replacement of the swimming pool, landscaping, and deck areas with a new pool and outdoor deck. As I mentioned, the treatment rooms would be the same. The increased floor area would include new exercise and water treatment rooms, exercise rooms, and the total renovations would be about 3,889 square feet. It includes the removal of the single-story spa building to allow for its two-story replacement. There's the existing pool and spa facilities. The site plans, unfortunately, on this the site's so big, they don't turn out fantastic in a presentation form. So I'm just going to show a few of the plans, and I'm sure Michael Ross is going to go into this as well, so I don't want to be super duplicative. Here's some overviews of what the expansion would look like. The elevations. As mentioned previously, the city did prepare an initial study for the project, which analyzed potential impacts of the project on all required resource areas and identified applicable mitigation measures. The initial study was circulated for public comment from June 18th to today. As of today at 5 o'clock, no comments were received on the initial study. All of the resource areas were found to have less than significant impacts or less than significant impacts with incorporation of mitigation measures. Mitigation measures related to nesting bird surveys, tree protection measures, geotech surveys, and really just kind of the routine people mitigation measures that we see. And the issue areas related to sensitive species, protected trees, cultural resources, geology and soils, and tribal and cultural resources would be reduced to a less than significant impact as a result of the mitigation measures. Up on the screen now are the use permit findings of approval. Staff's recommendation is to adopt a resolution adopting the mitigated negative declaration and a second resolution for the use permit based on the proposed findings and conditions of approval. Are there any questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
My question is, was there an arborist report submitted?
There was an arborist report and it was incorporated into the initial study.
And is that something that was distributed? Because I, with my review, did not find it.
It's an attachment to the initial study.
Electronic attachment?
It is.
Okay. No
It's
further
also,
questions.
Your personalized hard copy.
No problem. I was just curious.
Any other questions of staff? everybody, please. Thank you. Any other questions of staff? Don't see any. I'll open the public hearing and we'll hear from the applicant. You gonna do it, Michael? You're muted. Michael, you're muted yet. There you go.
Can you see a slide?
Yes.
Yep.
Excellent. Thank you, Christina, and thank you, members of the Planning Commission. We mentioned the last time we were before you that we were working on the spa expansion that we'd be back to you soon. And so it's my pleasure to make this presentation. Also attending tonight virtually is Joe Walsh, the VP of Development for the Hotel Ownership Group. Joe, I believe if you could have him join as well, Wendy, that would be great. Joe, are you there?
I hope I'm here.
I hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Can't see you, but hear you.
I'm here. I see Wendy nodding her head.
Okay, excellent. So the building in question and the area in question is Building L. Over the past 3 years, MacArthur Place has undergone a remarkable transformation. Virtually every building of the 20 buildings has been renovated, remodeled, or refurbished. And Building L is the last building of the group of buildings to be renovated and expanded. And
Ron, could you mute yourself if you're gonna futz with your papers? Because you keep knocking up the mic.
Sure.
Thanks.
in 2018, we presented a similar but smaller project, somewhat smaller project than the one that we are presenting to you this evening. And in 2018, it diagrammatically, it looked like what I'm going to present tonight. But the primary difference was the single-story spa building that is to the north of the two-story building. We were going to renovate that and retain it as a single-story building. But upon further study, when we really drilled down into it, we realized that the cost of renovating that single-story older building with different floor levels and low ceiling heights and things like that would be very costly and not really effective. And so we're coming back to you today where we are removing that single-story building and adding a new two-story building to it, and hence the project grew in size. But even though it grew in size, really the intensity of use in the overall hotel site remains largely the same. The 64 guest room count is unchanged. The 7 treatment room count is unchanged. The 132 restaurant and bar seating capacity is unchanged. The 150 meeting room seating capacity is unchanged. There's still going to be a gym, albeit it's going to be larger. The staff count is unchanged, but the overall building in gross sense is going to be expanded by around 4,400 square feet, and we're going to renovate around 3,874 square feet. But importantly, within this, what the hotel really needed was additional back of house space, laundry, support space, lockers, restrooms for staff and things like that, because some of these functions are now occupied or housed in the Connex boxes in the parking lot in the west lot. And so the sort of interrelated ecology of this site is when we build this, we get to remove the Connex boxes, and everything is sort of hinged together, and that was one of the ambitions of this project. So our approach is this. We're proposing to take this green common area in the middle and basically create a plaza, a social plaza in the middle of the garden landscape. How we're going to do this is create a building that frames a common green. The spa building is going to expand to the east and to the north, and in so doing, it's going to embrace this outdoor area. There's a precedent for this. I really have an affinity to L-shaped buildings and U-shaped buildings that create protected, beautiful outdoor spaces. They embrace them. And we have a great precedent right here in town, the historic Sonoma Mission, as well as the barracks, creating these L-shaped spaces. And we're proposing to do the same here in the middle of the MacArthur Place gardens and campus. What you see is the landscape architect's proposal for the new pool and outdoor areas. And then the purple areas are the building that's renovated and added on to. And it forms the southern and partial western boundary of this new outdoor area. Like what Christina indicated, the image number 1 is what's there today. Image number 2 indicates what spaces are going to be demolished. Image number 3 shows how the new spaces are being married to the existing 2-story building. And image number 4, the overall massing concept for the building. What's really cool about this is that on the wing that goes east-west, there's a sun deck that overlooks the pool area, providing another opportunity to appreciate the site, and it allows views to the hills and creates this special space, this sort of privileged space that people can come and sit and enjoy. The first floor plan is basically enlarged changing rooms, the back of house space, an enlarged spa office, and a reception area, an enlarged gym, and some restrooms serving the pool, as well as a pool mechanical room. The second floor is 7 treatment rooms, a relaxation room, and a movement studio and a sun deck. The architecture is going to be resonant with the architecture that exists there now. It's going to be the same materials, finishes, scale, massing, and overall sense of place that we've created there, and that Suzanne originally had a vision for. We built on that, which is basically, this is a campus of clustered farm buildings, and we're going to be using the same architectural language on the spa. Layla. Here's some images of the spa, approaching it from the southeast up what we call the curvy path on the way to Layla, the restaurant and the barn. This is the entry, and above it is part of the movement studio, and what we're calling the lantern, where it's the movement studio has an overscaled window and an octagon window and a cupola above, and it will softly glow at night. You can see the sun deck there, and also the entry to the gym. Here's looking the other direction with your back towards the barn, down the curvy path. You can see the entry to the gym, the sun deck, and the entry to the spa itself. A view from the sun deck into the outdoor pool areas and some of the guest rooms towards the north. A view across the pool towards the spa. And another view towards the southeast. the additions have been carefully scaled to be consistent with the size and architecture and the landscape that's there now. And I think it's going to fit very nicely and settle into the overall campus really well. So we've done a parking analysis. There's 131 total parking spaces now with the 10 that have been recently added. The 64 guest rooms, 7 treatment rooms, 132 seat restaurant, and 150 seat meeting room and 32 person shift was covered in the 109 spaces that were of the original 121 in the 2018 use permit. And what we're proposing to do is from the parking space reserve, apply 7 of those spaces to cover the 4,000 square feet of additional spa area, even though we're not increasing the overall intensity of use. The spaces are the same spaces that exist now. They're just larger and more consistent with the brand and the quality of the overall hotel and resort. And so if you approve this, 117 spaces would be assigned to hotel use and 15 spaces would remain in the future bank of parking spaces that can be used flexibly by the hotel. So during our last meeting, Joe was very diligent, and I'd like him to describe, if you would, Joe, what you've done relative to improving the parking plan and addressing some of the needs for assigned staff parking and other improvements that have happened over the last couple of weeks.
Sure thing, Michael. Am I on the screen yet?
Well, your
We can
voice
hear
is, you have to click, Gio, can you click the video camera so your image comes up?
Okay, here it is. Start my video. There you go.
There you are. We can see you.
You can see me?
Yes,
Can you
and
tell
hear
it's, you can hear me? Can you see me?
Yes,
You can see me?
yes.
See me.
So what's up on the screen right now, Joe, is the parking plan implementation slide.
Oh, thanks, Michael. I can see that. Can you see me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Can you tell it's 113 degrees in Phoenix? You cannot. Okay. Little humor. Okay. Well, thanks, Michael. Good summary. So thank you, commissioners, for the comments last time. And I appreciate the approval of the additional parking spaces. So since June 11th, we added the asphalt that was required. That was the key thing. So that helped us add the additional 10 spaces to the 131. A couple of commissioners had what I thought were great comments, and the comments were, why don't you just assign staff parking? So I've assigned 40 staff parkings. I've striped them yellow. We finished the striping project yesterday, and we named them staff. And then the other comment was a very good comment, that the parking spaces for the average customer of a 4- and 5-star hotel is going to not be a compact car. So we took the spaces, you'll see these spaces here and the 40 that we've assigned. The vast majority of those are compact spaces, which made sense because the average, after looking at it, it seems sort of obvious. The average employee space is a compact space. The average customer is not. So we did that. The conditions of approval we got from the fire chief, we met. That was really the driving force of this. We had to do the asphalt to get a 30-foot turning radius. So that's been accomplished. We were able to do that without taking out and killing the 2 trees. So we were able to cut the roots of the 2 trees that I mentioned last month and still achieve the turning radius. So our arborist looked at it. We think we're hopeful that the trees can stay, and that helps with the screening along Broadway. And then the other item is far north part of this, or the far south part, but the top of that photo, the fire chief wanted a hammerhead so that in the end, which is the southwest portion of the property, there's a turnaround. So we did that. We finished the project, the ceiling, the striping and everything. We finished it yesterday. And then we still have a little bit of work to do. We rented the lot across the street for the employees to park in. And the employee parking plan starts Sunday. The employees have been off for 4 months with the shutdown, the state required shutdown, and they're just coming back. And then we just have some bollards and other items to do, and then we'll have it. And we think the 40 spaces is well above what was required for employees, but with the ebb and flow of employees, we think that's the appropriate number. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Joe. Well, that actually ends the summary, and thank you very much for this opportunity to present these thoughts and images to you, and we're available to participate in Q&A.
Okay, are there, if you could unshare your screen, Michael?
Okay.
Are there questions of the applicant?
Yeah, Mr. Chair. I apologize for not having some of this information embedded in my head, but I was not part of the approval process for the things that took place in 2018. So refresh my memory. The parking area that's to the east of the entry area, is that a valet parking area? In other words, is it tandem parking that makes it impossible for anyone but the valet parking staff to use it?
I can field that, Commissioner Barnett. The east side of the lot, when you drive in, there's approximately 12 entry spaces, and then, the remaining spaces are along the creek. The total
Yes.
is 2. Under the current plan, all of those spaces are direct drive-in spaces, but they're controlled by the valet. So those are 42 valet spaces. Those are the primary spaces for the valet parkers when cars come for overnight stays, as well as for the restaurant.
Okay. Let me ask you this. I mean, I know your occupancy is going to be lower than a post or pre-pandemic period, but if I were going to stay at your hotel, I don't want a stranger, no matter how well intentioned, getting into my car and driving it anywhere. And I think maybe that's going to be a reflection of the age of the guests that come, or their economic class. But all I can say is that I think in this current atmosphere, I'm not seeing how valet parking is going to work. I don't think people are going to use it. I don't think they're going to want to use it. And if I recall from previous discussions, you're basically going to require it. So what's your contingency plan on all this?
That's actually a great comment. I was able to be here this weekend and watch what happened. The hotel opened on Wednesday.
Yeah.
After 4 months of being closed. And the vast majority of customers were okay with valet parking, but there definitely were customers that did not want to valet park. So what the staff had a lot of pre-COVID opening training, and I think they've done a very good job. And it's very difficult, as you know, the restaurant staff and the hotel staff. So they let the customers that did not wish to be valet parked to park right in the entrance. There's 12 spaces in the entrance. And then a couple customers had Teslas. So we basically had the valet parker open the west lot so they could park in the electric vehicle parking spaces. But there were a few, but I was kind of surprised. A lot of customers were okay with it. I mean, the staff's got a great protocol. They send out a CDC notice prior to a customer arriving, kind of like what you see now with the airlines. But I think they've implemented a good plan. And then there's there's 42 spaces that are not behind a gate for a customer to park in should they wish. But it just seems like the staff is handling on a one-on-one basis as the customer brings the issue up.
Okay, and you said you had rented the property across the street. That's the old truck and auto lot?
Yes, sir. And I appreciate getting the approval last month. Unfortunately, the vendors didn't work out as well as I wished to have the lot, the paving, limited paving, but to meet what the fire chief wanted, sealing and striping. So I rented from Bill Walters, the owner's representative. I rented the lot for 3 days so that when we displaced everyone into the community on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, we had the employees parking vast majority across the street. Now we don't need that now because now we have 40 assigned employee parking spaces.
I see. So that was just a very temporary use.
Yes, I tried to get the parking lot seal and stripe, which is a pretty minimal project, but it's very productive. I tried to get it done prior to the opening of the hotel. We got half of it done. We didn't get the It's now complete. We just have some signage and wheel stops and items like that. But the suggestions were good. I mean, having assigned employee parking spaces with the word staff with a yellow stripe, kind of hard to miss that. So the staff knows where to park. And the valet parkers know not to park a valet car. And we've done the math, and we have an appointment with Christina on our preliminary parking plan. And I think we've gotten some of the root issues out of the way, which are things disrupting parking spaces that have nothing to do with parking, construction, storage, deliveries. So I spent a few days at the property before this meeting to make sure we could correct that. Feel good that we'll put a good plan in place to improve on the situation.
Okay, so just to clarify for my own, for myself, technically then you don't have any parking striped or otherwise on the hotel property which couldn't be used for self-parking if that was a decision you wanted to make in the future. In other words, the parking space calculations that you've presented are not based on parking spaces which are in a configuration which would prohibit the public from using them if you decided to allow that. Am I right?
That's a great question. The way the condition of approval was written in the previous conditional use permit, we are required to provide valet parking for all customers, which we wanted.
Yes.
So if you're staying the night or you're coming to MacArthur Place, we're required to provide valet parking. And that's what the operation team wanted from a service standpoint, not from a permitting standpoint. So if you come to the hotel, there's generally 2 valet parkers per shift and they do a great job. If you don't want to be valet parked, your options are you could park on the street if you're not a hotel customer and come to the restaurant, or you could tell the valet parker you have an issue. So in answer to your question, we're doing what we were required on the condition of approval, but for service, not for conditions of approval. We want to valet park everyone. That was the ownership's decision to do. But if a customer wishes to park the car themselves, it's not been an issue. There's parking spaces in the west lot or the east lot for them to do that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, sir.
Other questions of the applicant?
I have one.
Okay, Sheila.
So I'm just wondering, with the expansion of the gym and the spa facility, is there any intent to have these facilities be open to the public for like a gym membership or a spa membership or anything along those lines that would be in addition to hotel guests?
Great question. So the reason this plan is different than the prior plan, as Michael articulated, was we hadn't done market research when the property was acquired. So our market comp set is Solage, is Bardesano, it's the Meadowwoods, it's really 4 and 5 star Forbes properties. The prior plan didn't really address what we needed. So there is no plan at all to offer a membership for people to come to the hotel that are not hotel customers. The goal is could a transient customer come and use the spa? Without question. but there's no membership sale. So the exercise facility, the stretching room, that's all designed for the 64 hotel guests. The spa itself, we have high aspirations to receive a Forbes starred rating, as some of our competitors have done, but there's no intention. We're not at the size of a facility to offer memberships.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Questions? I'm not seeing anyone, so we'll open this up for the public, for public comment. Do we have anybody in the queue or with email?
No public comment.
That's easy. All right, we'll close the public comment and bring it back to the commission for discussion and action.
And Chairperson, can I make one comment on the conditions of approval? The resolution and the conditions of approval were all just acceptable. I mean, it was all very logical. The one issue that I had on the conditions of approval was PRMD is the sewage, I guess the group that collects the fees for sewage, and I think their name
The county organization.
Yes, sir. So we previously felt we were overcharged on the fees and the fees on the prior renovation, and it was basically on the sewage. And we proved that we reduced the sewage impact of the hotel by 9%. This is just by following Cal Green. I mean, we had to follow code. So the way the conditions of approval are written, I can't get a building permit for the spa, and my goal is to get a building permit in September, October. I can't get that until I have PRMD's approval on the fees. Our issue has been, we believe there are calculations on the fees, and they haven't been, I mean, they've been impacted by COVID and everything. They haven't been super responsive on everything. My request is that I have the time to work out any dispute on fees until occupancy, not on building permit. Because our window to build the spa, you know, is dependent on what happens to the hospitality industry, i.e. what happens with COVID. So I've been trying to position to the hotel ownership group that should there be another, you know, shutdown statewide or not, I'm ready to build the spa as soon as the funding is ready and approved by ownership. I request of the commission that PRMD not hold me up. I have the time to negotiate the proper fees from PRMD. And then I had the number, but it's not in front of me now, and the lights have gone out, so I can't see the number.
Christina, do you know which condition that is?
I'm looking now. I just pulled up the conditions directly from the sanitation district. Just give me a minute.
I'm sorry, and it's called Sanitation District now, not PRMD. I believe.
Looks like it's condition 12.
It is 12, and my request is simply that we all of that to occupancy, which gives me the 6 to 8, 9 months that I need to logic out that my calculations, I believe, are accurate.
So just changing it from paid prior to issuance of a building permit to prior to occupancy.
Yes, sir. Yeah. So it still has to be paid. It's just I sent a letter of dispute a year and a half ago, and there's been a delay in response, as understandable given everything that's happened. I just wish to have the time to present my case and not delay the project.
I would support that. The conditions straight from the county, as far as the timing goes, state that the applicant shall pay fees to PRMD at current rates in effect at the time of the sewer permit application and the sewer permit creation to collect this fee. I don't understand what that says. I would support the requested change in the timing.
Okay. We're back to discussion from the commission and possible action. Anybody want to start? Larry?
Okay. I guess I'm taking the floor for this one. You know, this COVID situation has created a lot of uncertainties. in every respect. And it makes it impossible to, as we've just seen on the project we were evaluating prior to this one, makes it impossible to get into a equal case evaluation of matters of impacts on surrounding streets and things like that, because the traffic patterns and the whole use of commercial properties have undergone such a shift during this era of pandemic, and it's hard to know how long it's going to last. All of that said, however, my concern remains the impact of parking on MacArthur Street and the streets directly off MacArthur that are across the street from the hotel. I guess that would be Austin Street, and perhaps First or Second Street. I'm not sure. And in the past, having witnessed obvious hotel employees go into their cars on those streets, it continues to remain a concern of mine. And I'm not sure whether we've adequately explored both the options that we have going forward to make sure that that doesn't become a problem, or the issue of how we properly monitor and evaluate whether there is a problem. Now, historically, you know, we've tended to approach things in Sonoma from the standpoint of complaint. So if a homeowner ends up irritated that there's constantly a car in front of their house where they normally like to pull up as they're going about their business during the day rather than pulling into their driveway, you know, that to me is more of a reaction to a situation rather than trying to come up with something in a proactive way to think it through before it becomes a problem. And my concern, as I mentioned, is that during the period of the pandemic, that valet parking is going to be far less popular than it would be normally. And that people, if they don't have the option, which I think you've addressed fairly well, Joe, have the option to park their car themselves in available spaces, that they will naturally go out into the street to do it. In terms of a proactive approach or a remedy that I'd like to throw on the table is the idea of stickering, a sticker permit program for some of the residences or the residential addresses on those adjacent streets, so that without a sticker you're limited to 2 or 3 hours parking. And then that brings up the issue of enforcement. And Christina, this may be something that you would address. As I understand it, and I wasn't part of the 2018 discussions, as I understand it, the city's concern was it wasn't going to have or didn't want to bear the expense or effort of having parking enforcement be extended to that area, and having someone regulatory, you know, a meter person regularly monitoring the parking of cars in those areas. It seems to me that if the commission feels that this is workable, and depending on the reaction of the applicant, if a sticker program, which is clearly resident-centric, and I'll confess to being kind of resident-centric about this project. I mean, I want to go back to its beginnings, because keep in mind that this hotel began as a 33-room executive retreat, and the neighbors were told there would never be a public restaurant. And that is the beginnings of this hotel. Now, I understand that things change over time, and business conditions change over time, and business opportunities arise, and I understand how things morph. But the fact is that this project as it is today would never make it through the Planning Commission in a residential neighborhood if you were starting from scratch. It would be considered too intense a use. It would be it would be a huge uproar. We're not in that situation, but we are in the situation where we can say, what are the needs of the local residents, and what can we do as a city to ensure that as the intensity of use of this property increases, that it doesn't impact the quality of life that they enjoy in that part of town. So I'm suggesting a sticker program. I'm suggesting monitoring and enforcement by the city. And if cost, it becomes an issue for the city. And frankly, in this day and age, based on my familiarity with the city budget, everything is going to become a cost problem for the city. That it also be looked at as to what the cost of the hotel's underwriting the enforcement element of a metering inspection would be, and seeing whether that's a viable option.
If I could chime in for a moment, the commission addressed this issue at our last hearing and requested a condition of approval that the hotel prepare a traffic management plan that looked at addressing parking during peak demand. That hasn't happened yet. They're working on it, and I understand the concerns. I think we should perhaps consider working with the existing condition that we have and seeing if that improves the program, and at a later date, if that's still an issue, we can deal with that through the parking management plan.
Well, here's my question or my concern. If we get a parking management plan that is based on a set of underlying assumptions insofar as results are concerned, we still need to be able to have a method of evaluation of that parking plan's effects. And if we don't have a way of evaluating it, then there's no way of determining whether it's a success or a failure.
Yeah, any parking plan is going to have some ongoing monitoring and compliance and checking and feedback with staff.
Can I make a suggestion that kind of follows on what Commissioner Barnett is saying? So great points. We want to be a good neighbor. We want to be compliant. And as I told Christina, we're working on the plan. And I think we've done a good job of identifying the sources of disruption of employee parking. But in that plan, we would be very open. And I've seen this in ski resorts where you have to comply. You know, it's very tough because you have, you know, random employees competing with skiers where, you know, perhaps we take the onus of having permitting on the employees so that the monitoring is simple. Employees have to have a little permit on their car so that when we monitor, and I think in the parking plan, we would be happy to do the self-monitoring because again, we want to comply. 40 parking spaces is more than what was required. I think 16 is what code says currently. And that we would basically put some self-compliance in versus pushing it to the city. But we are committed, and Greg Hans, who's our Executive VP of Operations, he understands the importance of this, and obviously he's trying to he just got the hotel open, he's working on it, but we want to resolve this issue because I don't want to come back and disappoint. I want everyone to be happy with our resolution and our practices, and all these will be put into the parking management plan.
Okay, thank you.
The point in fact is we do have a condition of approval already established last month, which requires that parking plan, and I think we have to give it a chance to work when we see it. And we can always step in and do something with permitting in the neighborhood if we have to, Larry, but I think that's a last resort. There is a 3-hour limit already on one side of MacArthur, which that can be monitored by the city. But I think the parking plan is the key, and I think that right now Joe has taken a good first step to stripe spaces for staff, and now we have to give it a chance to work.
Yeah, thank you. And in our plan, there are a couple things that we're going to ask for the city. We need a loading zone on MacArthur Boulevard that allows for the linen truck and the squarey truck to not come into the lot. And then we've done some internal things to prevent things happening to parking spaces, i.e., you know, we don't have a loading dock, so pallets and that sitting in parking spaces. These are all basic it's Hotel 101, but given everything that's happened, these are things.
Okay.
The safety issue relative to the exit of MacArthur Boulevard that we're going to ask the Public Works. When you exit the front drive, the visibility's not exactly what it should be. So we're going to ask for a couple spaces to be striped or zoned that they're for no parking. So all this will be in the plan that we'll submit to Christine next week.
I think that would take care of it as far as I'm concerned, unless anybody else from the commission wants to chime in on that one. If we don't have any other discussion, we could move into a motion. Who wants to take a crack at it? Steve?
I move that we approve the use permit amendment and design review application subject to the findings and conditions of approval attached to the staff report, with the exception of condition 12, which will be modified to require payment of the sewage fees prior to occupancy rather than building permit.
If I could hop in real quick, we need to have a motion to adopt the resolution for the initial study prior to action on the use permit.
The motion is amended accordingly.
Do we have to have this, that as a separate vote, Christina?
Well, it's two separate resolutions.
Yeah, all right. So we will take your motion, Steve, to be the one for the mitigated neg deck.
Okay, I just reading the first line of the agenda item. I don't see where this is laid out for me anywhere.
It's in the staff recommendation of the staff report. Actually, I think that there's something weird in iCompass. So I would recommend doing two motions, one motion to approve adoption of the resolution for the mitigated neg deck, and then a second motion for the use permit.
Okay, I was moving for the use permit. Do we need to do the neg deck first?
We do.
Okay, I move that we adopt the resolution approving the mitigated negative declaration.
Is there a second? All right, there's a second by Larry. Roll call, please.
Yes, Commissioner Barbos,
Yes.
Commissioner Kelso Barnett,
Aye.
Commissioner Larry Barnett,
Aye.
Commissioner Bohar,
Aye.
Commissioner O'Neill,
Yes.
Commissioner Wellender,
Yes.
and Chair Felder.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion passes unanimously.
Okay, Steve, you want to do the second one?
Sure. I move that we approve the use permit amendment and design review application subject to the findings and conditions of approval attached to the staff report, with the modification of condition 12 to allow to require payment of the sewage fees prior to occupancy rather than before obtaining the building permit.
Is there a second on that one?
Second.
All right. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Barbos,
Yes.
Commissioner Kelso Barnett,
Aye.
Commissioner Larry Barnett,
Aye.
Commissioner Bohar,
Aye.
Commissioner O'Neill,
Yes.
Commissioner Wellender,
Yes.
Chair Felder.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
You have your project, go to it.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Then we will move on to the next item on the agenda. So there are no items for discussion. Do we have planning director Storer on the line at all?
No, we don't, but I have some updates from him.
Okay, so this would be the issues update then?
Yes.
All right, thank you.
He would like you all to know that City Council approved a resolution to put the urban growth boundary on the ballot on November, along with a cannabis tax measure. Also, we received an extension from Verizon last week until the end of the year to work on a new design that incorporates the radio in the antenna. The council had continued this item to August, but it will be continued on that date to a date uncertain. This will be re-advertised at the City Council after they get the new design, as it will be a new hearing.
That doesn't come back to planning commission?
That's a good question. Not according to David's written update, but he can reach out to you and let you know.
Well, I guess that would be up to the council as to if they want to have the planning commission look at it first. But would you carry that message back to him and see where he stands on it?
Certainly.
Thank you. Thank you. That's all the issues update.
Yes.
And so comments from the commission.
Who says we don't approve anything?
Yes. Go ahead, Commissioner Ball.
I guess I've got a statement and a comment. Christina, do you know what the noticing program was for the MacArthur Place? I was surprised we didn't have any neighborhood correspondence on that.
Yeah, so the noticing for a negative declaration we filed with the county. So it was filed there and then also posted on the website. We also did a notice, the typical notice that goes out to the neighbors within 300 feet. We included the notice of the availability of the initial study and had the link in that document as well.
So there were none of those those fluorescent banners on the telephone poles or anything like that. They're all mailed to the neighbors.
Correct.
I just like to make a comment. I think that for a project of this magnitude, and perhaps for the Patton Street project, I'd like to see a policy that is more democratic and more illustrative of what's going on in these big projects. Like a large posted graphic of the layout and the details of the size of the project and so forth, so the neighbor can really get a good idea. Some people ignore those letters and the things on the mailbox, and I think a project ought to have some kind of graphics that describe it. Somebody could see what's going on rather than try to read that, understand what's going on out of a couple of paragraphs.
We do. We put all the information on our webpage. So our project development is really the best place to go and get that information. All the project plans are there, the notice of availability, the initial study is uploaded to the website there. So that's really where we're trying to direct people.
I think we have a precedent, at least in one case or so over on Newcomb, where there was a big billboard type thing with a description of the project that was coming in there and stuff so that neighbors could see that. We might want to think about that for major projects.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to back up Commissioner Bohar on that. This commission has brought that up before. Other cities do that, where on the site of the project is a large sort of billboard, as Chair Felder just said, graphic focused. It really catches people's attention, and I know that the telephone pole noticing and the mailers, I mean, it obviously alerts people to what's going on, but there generally aren't any graphics involved. And I think a better way to engage the community would be to do what other neighboring cities do, in addition to the mailed notices and the telephone pole, just a large, not for every project, but if it sort of goes over a certain magnitude, have a large sort of, not necessarily a billboard, but a big sort of sign right on the property showing what is proposed to go there. And I think you'd get a lot more.
We should put that on the list.
So I don't know, I've heard rumors we might be looking at the development code at some point this decade. We should put that in there as well.
Yep, I agree. Any other comments?
Speaking of the development code, what are we doing about that?
We're on hold.
I have an update.
Oh,
Well, not really. It just, if it came up, I got some information from David, and he wanted you all to know that he is going to be sending out a memo for future meetings and things that we need to be doing, and that he's been communicating with the city attorney's office about things to modify in the development code. So he's going to be sending out a memo to you about next steps.
watch for the mail. It's in the mail.
That's right.
Right.
Commissioner Wellender.
Two items. Is it fair to say that with the apparent absence of our planning director, that he hopefully is getting refueled someplace because of excess work in the last 3 months?
Yes, he's on vacation, and
Thank
he was on the phone earlier in the meeting, but his reception got really bad, and so he had to disconnect.
My suggestion is that if he was truly on vacation and if he was to call in again, hang up on him. Not good. And my second question is, I do realize that today is July 9th and it's a planning commission hearing date. Is there anything else significant about July 9th that we fellow commissioners should be aware of?
Maybe not the 9th, but maybe the 10th.
Oh, so I had my days wrong. I don't sing, so I refuse to sing happy birthday to Kelso, but I will say happy birthday, Kelso.
Thank you. Thank you, Your
Happy
Honor.
birthday.
Happy birthday.
Okay.
This is the last night of my 30s, and I couldn't think of a better place last night of my 30s than with all of you on my computer. So,
Nerve,
Well,
nerve alert, nerve alert.
now that you're turning 40, you can take this meeting and the basic tenor of it and the character of it and understand that this is basically what it's going to feel like for the next 20, 25 years. In other words, you've peaked. It's kind of downhill from here.
thank you.
Yeah,
Always
you're
a
welcome.
I'm ready for a motion to adjourn. Anybody want to make that one?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second.
All right. All in favor?
Yeah.
Bye.
Opposed? Motion carries. The meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Good night.
Night.